Ellis with ESTEEM Counseling and Consulting Services, and we are doing Ask the Therapist. Um, Today's Wednesday, May 6th. We are already in May. Time is just moving on and passing on, despite this pandemic and people feeling stuck and people feeling as if everything's on hold for them. At least that's what I'm hearing from my clients. Despite that, time is moving on, and we kind of have to move on with it and continue with our lives despite all of this. So today's topic, I wanted to talk about loss and grief and mental health. And we have with us today expert in grief and loss, Miss Tracy Roberson. So thank you, Tracy, for joining us tonight on discussing grief and loss and mental health. And again, I wanted to talk about this on multiple levels because there's multiple losses that's happening while we're in this pandemic, and also before and after this pandemic, we're going to have losses. And so talking about it from a general perspective, but also in regards to this pandemic, talking about it from that perspective as well. And so yeah, Tracy, can you tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll get started on it?
Yes, I'm Tracy Roberson, owner and operator of Loss of Love Counseling. I began my journey with grief and loss in 2013. I am a licensed professional counselor, but my heart just took me to studying, learning, and becoming an expert in grief and loss in 2013.
Wonderful. And so do you want to share a little bit about what brought you to that journey of grief and loss?
I can. In 2013, my brother, I lost my brother in 2013, and it was a tragedy for me and my entire family. So as a therapist, I had to learn how to cope with that tragedy. So that's what brought me to being an expert through experience and educationally.
Gotcha. And so because of your own experiences with loss, and this was a traumatic loss,
Yes.
you've had to figure out ways of coping. And so this is what this is about. And so we're wanting to provide people, the community, with tools and resources to deal with loss and to allow themselves to grieve and then deal with their mental health overall. And again, with this pandemic, with COVID-19, a lot of people are experiencing a lot of loss.
Yes.
And part of the reason this is such a big thing is this is worldwide. So a lot of us are experiencing this thing all at the same time.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's traumatic. It's a traumatic experience overall. And we're needing some help in talking about that. And it's important to talk about that. So Tracy, to start off by kind of giving us some definitions of what loss is.
Well, let's say this. What we're grief. Let's start with grief. Grief is a natural and a normal reaction to any type of change or loss. So what we're going through now is definitely a change, an unexpected change. So that brings me into loss. Loss is when you have lost something or someone, or you deprived from that. So that's where the grief and loss come in at. It's two different things, but they all encompasses a loss, right? So that's what we are going through in this pandemic right now.
Okay. And so are you saying grief happens before loss, or there's a loss and then from there we're going to naturally have a grief process?
Well, because the definition of grief is a natural and normal reaction to any type of loss or change. The grief is the actual emotion. The feeling is what you do because of the loss.
Okay. So the losses occur, right?
Exactly.
And so, and now tell us in your definition of loss.
Okay.
Or the definition of loss.
Well, there's several, but the one I would speak on is having something or someone taken away from you.
Okay.
Okay.
Having something or someone taken away from you.
Yes, something or someone. And what we're discussing right now is some things that has been
Mm,
taken away from us due to this pandemic. This was
gotcha.
abrupt. This was unexpected. So that's why we are discussing losses in this pandemic, which was
For
COVID
sure.
19.
Right. So So the definition in regards to loss, where we've lost some things as a
Mm-hmm,
result of this pandemic,
mm-hmm,
right? As well as we've lost people, because a lot of people have also passed away as a result of this virus. So we've lost things and we've lost people.
mm-hmm.
And again, the fact that it was so abrupt and unexpected is where some of that trauma is happening, right?
This,
So this becomes like a traumatic loss, which then leads to a traumatic grief. So traumatic grief and loss,
mm-hmm.
right? And so what are some of the things that people have lost
Ooh.
um,
And
during this pandemic? What are some things you would say?
as I share what some things that people or clients have shared with me, they lost, we have to, and if in people who's listening to this, you just think about what people have lost. People have lost jobs, people have lost
Mm-hmm.
security, people have lost their health, people have lost students, they're lost going to school, they've lost friendships. And when I say security, that's financial security, companionship. Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And just the freedom of going out. It's so much that we
Freedom.
don't realize that we've lost, that we have.
Mm-hmm.
People have lost hope. Some people have lost
Hope,
connections. So
connect.
it's really, really deep, and you have to really think about where you are and what you're going through. Think about someone had a lot of confidence,
Mm-hmm.
independence. You know,
Mm-hmm.
students
Independence.
ready to go to college, they did not get to graduate with their class normally. That's a loss.
Yes.
So it's so
Yes.
many.
Right. So many.
So many.
And me having a senior, I have a senior in high
Oh
school,
yes.
so we went through some of that.
Mm-hmm.
We went through some of that loss, right? He didn't, the loss of socialization that would have occurred during his senior year, the senior trips, the prom, and all those things, right? Those final memories of high school, what that looks like, what they're looking forward to, right? And
Right.
so the loss of those things, and because I'm a therapist, those are conversations I've had with my son, and we also had opportunities to speak with other seniors about this,
Right.
because it's important that we talk. It's important that we share our feelings. It's important that we validate what we feel. It's important that we express it and not dismiss it, not pretend it's not an issue, not bury it, none of those things. We want to make sure we bring it out. Um, so yes, so you've mentioned lots of multiple losses. And then on top of a lot of this stuff, because you've mentioned finances, employment, school for kids, relationships, friendships, independence, hope, socialization. There's all these losses that we're experiencing when in a lot of ways there becomes a loss of identity. And I
Yes.
know you're going to talk a bit about that, a loss of self, right? Who we were before this, the things we're used to doing, because these are all the things we did. And now some of these things are taken from us abruptly. And now with a lot of my clients, as you mentioned, are like, well, what do I do now? Who am I? Right. So there's a loss of self and a moment to kind of find yourself again. So there's a lot of losses and a lot of layers of losses that occur. And ultimately, death is an ultimate
Right.
loss, right? At least in the human sense, in the physical sense. But yes, all these layers of loss is happening. And guess what? Because this is a pandemic and it's worldwide, community wide, a lot of us are going through it.
Right. Right.
A lot of us are going through these things.
You know what?
Yes.
A lot.
Yes.
Everybody has been touched by this.
Everybody.
No one
Yeah.
is exempt from what we're dealing with. That's
Right.
the realization of where we are today in this moment.
Yes. No one's exempt from it.
Nope.
And one of the things, and going back to what you said with exemption, loss is a concept, and I'm going to speak in regards to death at this point,
That's
because
fine.
death is also something
Mm-hmm.
that's inevitable, right?
Yes.
Uh, and I had a client just recently lost her grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that she talked a lot about because this is in the midst of this pandemic. So we'll talk about that too, because
Okay.
in the midst of this pandemic, people are still losing people naturally through other things,
Yeah.
right? But then can't properly find closure, or in
Exactly.
the way that we're used to. I
Right.
wouldn't say properly, in the way that we're used to.
Mhm.
So then she started talking about, oh my God, am I going to lose more people? When, again, death is something, it's inevitable. And so loss is something we experience all the time. And
Mhm.
so um, at this moment, we're experiencing a lot of it all at the same time.
Layers. Layers.
Layers of it all at the same time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
what also we'll go back to grief,
Hmm.
death, the thing about the loss in this pandemic, because it is layers, what we have to learn and teach as therapists, each loss has to be acknowledged as its own loss.
Yes. I like that.
Yeah.
And when you say that, meaning, give
Meaning,
us a little bit about what you mean.
because I lost my freedom to go out without a mask on, I have to say, hey, Tracy, you can no longer walk around without a mask. So I have to be prepared and tell myself that, you know what, this is where we are today. So this is what
Hmm.
I have to do to feel comfortable going out to the grocery store or wherever I deem appropriate and essential for me to go out. This is what we call our new normal. And
Hmm.
for some of us and people that may suffer with anxiety, this is just what has to be done. Even with the changes of the job, I'm now working remotely. I'm now a full part-time therapist online. All of that's new. So I have to acknowledge each one of those losses that I had. However, I'm learning to adjust to my new normal.
Right. I like that.
Thank you.
Um, and in dealing with a lot of clients, that is something that I've recognized. And you and I, we've talked about this before in terms of recognizing each of those things, because we tend to clump everything together, right? And so we're clumping everything together. And so what happens is when people are finding, okay, the incident or whatever the thing is happened, and months later, years later, we're still grieving. Weeks later, however long, we're still grieving. But part of that too is with this loss of this, there's layers of it, and each of those things require its own acknowledgement, its
Yes.
own loss, right? So not only are we losing, like you said, the freedom, acknowledge that. Oh my God, I can't move freely as I want to. I
Right.
can't just get up, go to the store like I want to,
Mhm.
right? With that, oh my God, I can't meet up with my friends like I want to. That's a loss too. Those are separate, right?
Right.
So the moving around is one thing. No, I can't meet with my friends, and the loss that comes with, oh my God, I can't talk to my friend the way that I used to. And one of the things with that, which one of my clients helped me recognize, and we processed some of this, is the loss of touch, right?
Yes.
And so because we can't be around each other, we got to stay 6 feet apart. We're humans, part of our connection, part of us being human is to physically touch one another, hugs, kiss, daps, whatever. But now it's like there's some of that's happening, and so then that human connection and that touch we're lacking,
It's
right? And
lost.
it's creating an effect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interrupted. And so for this particular client, because she couldn't touch the way that she's used to touching her family, her friends, she started feeling depressed. She
Okay.
started to feel the depression. And so one of the things we talked about is, and again, this is the time to be creative, right? So
Mhm.
we're in a state now where we have to really be creative about how we're going to cope. And so one of the things we talked about is getting teddy bears. So when
Mhm.
she's talking,
Okay.
communicating with her friends, with her family members, she could buy one for each of them, one to represent the people that's most significant in her life. Get the teddy bear as you're seeing them via Zoom. Hug the teddy bear, touch it, because again the physical and the tangible thing of touching is what she's lacking, right? And so then creating that for that moment, with the teddy bear was something we talked about, and she found that very useful
That's good.
as she's connected, and it brought her closer to them. touching and hugging the bear. And sometimes with some clients, because I've used this a few times with different clients, if there's a favorite perfume the person has, put the perfume on there, then that entices our senses. Because again, we're human, right? Our
Mhm.
human connections through all of our senses. Touch is one. Touch, smell, taste, all these things. And so a lot of those things are lost in a lot of different ways when
Mhm.
it comes to the relationships. Um, so you are absolutely right. And we got to grieve and mourn all those things,
Mhm.
right? So although she's talking to her family every day, she's like, I talk to them every day, but something's still missing. And she recognized, oh, I can't touch them. I can't kiss them. And that's what she recognized was missing. And so then we had to kind of grieve that and process that and acknowledge that. So that's the great thing that you mentioned with acknowledging each of those things. Yes.
I think that's also awesome because she's coming to therapy. But what about the people that aren't going to therapy? They're not in a place where they are able to recognize or acknowledge these different types of emotions and feelings, brings it being related to the loss of the job, the freedom. That's what I am a little concerned about because people don't really know how to be in tune with their feelings and emotions and what's bringing this on. That's the physical part of the loss. You'll have a headache. You don't know why you have this headache. You have a backache. You don't know what's bringing this backache on, but it could be because of the mountains of grief that you have due to the losses that you're suffering and this time. So I'm
Right.
glad that you asked me to participate in this conversation with you with the hopes that people will hear about it, they will listen, and they will learn that what they are going through right now is so normal. It's so
Mhm.
normal. It's okay to have all these feelings because it's out of our control, your control, my control. Yes, we're therapists, but this was a shock, turned everyone's world upside.
Correct. That's right.
Have coping skills